Hey everybody, it's Morgan Ingram here with SDR Chronicle number 40, and super excited about this one because I have a special guest, Heather Morgan. She's gonna
Hi.
dive. What's up? She's gonna dive into just cold emailing tactics. How to really craft a good email so that your prospects will respond to it and want to do business with you. So without further ado, I'll let Heather introduce herself, and we'll dive right into the material today.
Hi, thanks for having me, Morgan. And I'm the other Morgan, Heather Morgan. So that's kind of funny. Unlike most salespeople, I guess, especially in tech, I didn't start out doing sales or working in tech at all. I was actually an economist. I worked with various organizations overseas, including, but not limited to, World Bank. And I was actually in North Africa after Arab Spring in Cairo. And that was a pretty crazy time. And that actually prompted me to finally move back to the United States.
Cool.
And that is how I ended up in San Francisco, taking a biz dev job at a little mobile games tech company that had just got into 500 startups down in Mountain View. And I had no idea what I was doing at all. And I knew nothing about games. I had zero industry connections. It was one of those things where I had randomly cold contacted the CEO because I saw an interesting article about him and the company. And cold contacting people is what I do. It's something that is like a fun game to me that I've been doing since I was a kid. And so that's how I got the job. And then before I knew it, I asked him, what exactly am I supposed to do in this job? And he said, no problem. It's easy. All you have to do is start conversations with C-level executives in the gaming industry, which I knew nothing about and I knew none of. And so I was like, oh, yeah, easy, cool, okay. Well, we just started putting together a couple of CSVs for mail merges with some different templates after doing some research online and offline. And before I knew it, I was sending a couple hundred emails out to different contacts. And within a couple weeks, I had like a 67 or 68% response rate.
That's awesome.
And yeah, I didn't even know that was good though at the time.
I wish I could even get close to that.
I was like, oh yeah, it's okay. I think it's doing fine. And my boss was like, how are you getting meetings with like the founder of Guitar Hero and this guy from Kabam and this guy from EA? And I was like, I don't know. Like, do you have intros? I'm like, who is going to intro me? I don't know anyone.
Exactly.
So just like kind of being a little bit more personalized with email, pretty unusual template that actually mentioned my work as an economist in North Africa because it was a mobile games company focused in the Middle East region in terms of like who their users were. And so I just painted it as a very interesting, unusual business opportunity from an unusual person. And it got a bunch of meetings. And so that's kind of where it really started to evolve for me.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, with that high of a response rate, people are probably like, how in the world did you do that? So I know you kind of talked about it, but
totally.
What kind of research were you doing before you emailed? Were you looking at their blog? Were you just looking at their LinkedIn? Like what's your process behind that?
Yeah, so I looked at a number of different things, and it's been years since I did that. I ended up starting my company, which is now SalesFolk. But 3+ years ago, if I remember correctly, I looked on Crunchbase and AngelList and LinkedIn. Some of these people might have had a little bit of writing. Some of these people were also doing strategic investing in smaller companies. And so one of the pieces of criteria I was looking at from my initial list was cross-referencing it with some other lists that I had where there were also people strategically investing in games or mobile or, regional expansion into Africa or the Middle East or other emerging markets, because I found those to be all really interesting angles. And what I had, being that I didn't know anything, it was an early stage company, my strongest benefit that I could offer was my expertise as an economist. And my understanding of the region and different opportunities to expand there. And so I took that and I segmented it based on, okay, are these people who are already investing and partnering with people in the region? Or are they maybe looking at investing in mobile or looking at investing in games already, or, you know, other? And so I segmented things a few different ways like that. And I really honestly didn't have that much personalization in my templates. I had a few like additional special merge fields I was using for like some people that I thought were, you know, really VIP, that I felt we had a lot in common with, in terms of like, you know, one of our investors knew someone they knew and things like that. But most of it wasn't really like that. Most of it was actually very, very mass, because I like to think about velocity. And so one-off emails are fun. I do them at least once a day just for practice and a good exercise. But as far as outbound goes, there's too much opportunity cost as far as how long that will take. And so I like to think as an economist about Pareto efficiency, which is that point where you have quality and quantity, or, you know, like speed and quality. And so that's like velocity. And that's how I like to think about outbound. How can we automate while still making it feel completely personal and thoughtful? And, you know, there's some happy little medium where it's not like a one-on-one email, but it's still very, very personal feeling and, you know, good enough to make people open it up. And in order to find that point, you kind of have to test and see what makes sense for your market and your audience based on where you stand. You know, are you like a new company, or are these companies that you're working, or is the company that you're working for already very established? Are they like an industry leader? Like if you're Google, your outbound is going to be very different than a random little startup, because you're Google. Yeah, Google. Totally. And so with that in mind, you kind of have to think of all these things, and like, who are you reaching out to is really important, but also what is your competition doing or not doing? And you can learn from that based on looking at a lot of different things on their website, signing up for drip emails with a throwaway email account, and also even doing a little bit of catfishing if you really feel like it, in terms of like harvesting. Yeah, do what you have to do. So I'm all about like guerrilla but really effective outbound tactics, and that's what we help our customers with, and that's what we built our entire company on. Since, you know, bootstrap company, not a lot of context in the beginning. What are you going to do? So that's kind of what I believe in.
I want to kind of dive into, you talked about guerrilla tactics. Like, what's been the best guerrilla tactic you've seen, and like what's been something that someone tried to do a guerrilla tactic and it just ended up horrible for them?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things you can do. I mean, I have like an endless list. Should probably turn this into a guide, but I guess so I'm all about cold email and mail merges. And so I think it works really well when you can come up with a list of people that have something in common that isn't obvious. And that could be, you know, attending a conference or a certain party of a conference, or that could be an award people won or something like that. But the best thing that you can do is take this information that either is obvious or maybe a little less obvious, like kind of a strange indicator that you found with a LinkedIn X-ray search, or some other scrape data. And then rather than directly saying like, I found you on LinkedIn, or like, congrats on this award, or blah, 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 I like to try to incept information that I have from that without directly saying it. Because if you just say, oh, I found you on LinkedIn, or I see you use Salesforce, it's kind of like, yeah, everyone's duh. Doing that. Yeah, like everyone does this. This is not interesting. It's not important. Right. But if you can take that piece of information, or even a more unusual one, and leverage it in a way that people don't normally leverage it, that's when you're really getting somewhere. So I like to think of it as like intersecting different data points, and then doing something very different so that you stand out. So for example, say I know that you're a Salesforce user and that you sponsored an event at Dreamforce.
Right.
And you're a B2B SaaS company and you're a sales leader and you're hiring. Maybe I can make some kind of joke about, you know, well, there's a lot of different things I could do, but like I could make a joke about what a pain Dreamforce was and how, you know, you might, you know, get a lot of nice free food and drinks, but probably you didn't find that ideal sales hire there.
Right.
And that's a theoretical one that's, you know, kind of a little more obvious just off the top of my head.
Right.
But the more you can think about, okay, like I know they're using Salesforce, I know they're a VP sales, I know they're hiring.
Right.
What are their pain points? What are they probably trying to do? And then extrapolating those next level points from that, you can take that information and then you can turn it into a statement or a question or something that pokes around those pain points to the point that you feel like, or they feel like you're like, reading their mind.
Like basically. Data points that are the questions that are leading them to the meeting. To where like, oh wait, like I actually am really thinking about that. So like kind of already being in their head.
Yeah, like, exactly.
Yeah.
But not in an obvious way. It's not like, oh, I mean, you could have an email that's like, I wanted to see you at Dreamforce. I missed you.
Right.
But you could take something totally different from that. Like, oh, we're actually, I don't know if you sponsor events or not, but we're actually sponsoring an event for Salesforce power users. And there's a lot of blah, 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 and some great potential sales hires that will be attending this meeting. And so without saying that you know these things about them, you sprinkle them in, and you don't even have to do them in an overt way. In fact, sometimes it's better to be a little more subtle because they have more FOMO and they're like, holy crap, I need this right now. This is like fate that I got this email today. Rather than thinking this is a cold email, they're trying to sell me, da 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 da. Yeah. It's more like, oh my God, like
right timing, right everything, like blessing.
Exactly. And so it's all about taking these things and being a little bit more camouflaged and subtle and very tactful and effective so that you have magic in your outbound. And it's still very automated and scalable and effective.
Of course.
But, you know, there's some kind of magic going on that just overwhelms them emotionally to just respond without even thinking about, is this a sales email? What do they want? Da, da, da. But like, I need to respond right now.
And to do that at scale, you kind of talked about the one-off email. How long should you really be spending to really make that personal and to create that magic?
So, I mean, it depends, like, in terms of how big is your market. Obviously, if you have a really small market and you're selling airplanes and your deal size is really big and you have a limited number of customers, you probably should personalize every single one. But for most B2B SaaS salespeople, I would, unless they're like doing really big enterprise sales, I'd probably recommend just thinking in terms of buyer personas. And with that, you can just create templates for that persona and do very minimal personalization, but think in aggregate of like, okay, for this title, this company size, this industry, what are their pain points? What KPIs do they care about? How should we speak to them? Who do they trust? What do they like? What do they hate? Blah, blah, blah. If you can do that in aggregate and create a sequence that hits on the major points that are most likely to be, you can get 30% response without doing hardly any personalization other than like having all that criteria set based on who your list is and who you're writing for at the beginning.
Yeah, no, and that's really awesome. And that's something that we've, over Terminus, that's what we've been doing, is doing it by personas and making sure that the KPIs resonate with that person.
Yeah, exactly.
And then kind of want to talk about this because this is something that a lot of people kind of like don't really know, but longer emails or shorter emails when you're doing your cold outreach?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's funny that you say that because I've heard people, it's usually like kind of older industry people, but
Yeah.
I've heard people say, I believe in short emails, only 10 sentences, which is like, holy crap, that's not.
What can I really say in 10 sentences?
I swear to God, it's like a
What?
small blog post. Yeah, I've seen it. Trust me, I've seen these. So
That's insane.
usually those are people who did like affiliate marketing or like, I don't know, like some really old school industry thing for a long time, and they're smart and they know their audience, but they don't really know email and like modern digital communication.
Right.
That said, I don't really obsess too much about exact length or characters or number of sentences.
Right.
The key thing that you need to know is focus on one main point, whether it's a pain point, a benefit, idea, whatever, per email. In your sequence, that you can focus on different things, but each email needs to have one core thing. And so to answer your question, it needs to be long enough to be compelling and concrete and credible and not so vague and generic that people don't know what you're talking about or it's confusing. Right.
Yeah.
But conversely, don't like have 20 different points, just have one. And so that's usually like 3 to 5 sentences.
Mm-hmm.
Once in a while it's 2 sentences. Once in a while it's 6. On occasion it's 7, but that's a very rare, more of an outlier case.
Cool. And kind of with the long and short emails, what's been a really good cold email that you received, maybe from a follow-up from an event that you can kind of like pick apart and tell it why it was good? And then what was like a horrible email template example that you had and you were just like, why was this even sent to me?
Yeah, well, there's so many for both examples. There's a lot, excuse me, there's a lot more really bad ones, unfortunately.
I saw your post about the Salesforce one. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, and you can look more at our Hall of Shame. There's a little tab on the Salesfolk blog at salesfolk.com. It says Hall of Shame. But one of the ones that comes to mind is the Salesforce email that I got that said that I attended, or not attended, but that I came to someone's booth. And I definitely did not go to their booth. And I talked to them and they kind of apologized because they had some data quality issue. And apparently that the email really came, or my email came to them because I registered for a party they could have sponsored that was like a Mercado party, which, totally fine. They couldn't say, did you enjoy the blah, blah, blah party? Yeah. But they had that mistake. And because of that, I felt lied to. And I don't really take these things that personally, to be honest. But like, it was this knee-jerk reaction, which made me feel like there's got to be other people that have the same feeling that are probably way less forgiving and vocal about it than I am, that probably just looked and marked spam or forwarded it around and laughed at it or all kinds of things. And so in calling it out, I tried to teach people what not to do. And I think one of the really important things with segmentation and personalization is you have to be careful with it. Right. And there's a lot of things that you can do to just kind of cover yourself. And so I wrote in our email newsletter last week, our private newsletter, which people can sign up for on the site and also on the email mastery course. We have another free newsletter that's kind of like even better tips. But what I talked about was how if they had just said something as simple as like, I was hoping we had a chance to meet at Dreamforce, but it looks like we didn't connect. Right. I think you either came by our booth or went to one of, excuse me, to one of the parties we sponsored, but I'm not sure. If they weren't sure about the quality of their data, they should have done something more like that to cover themselves in that worst case scenario. If they were 100% sure, and things happen sometimes, but it didn't seem like that. And so by making that leap, if they had just changed the message a little bit to be a little bit more broader, they would have been fine. And there would have been nothing wrong with it. I mean, the email itself could have been better, but as soon as you're saying something, not just wrong, but like, you're telling me that I did something that I did not do. Right. That's just you piss people off. Yeah, totally. so I think that's a bad problem. There's also tons of long and crappy and confusing or boring feature-focused emails that are awful. In terms of a really good one, let me think. Actually, I had a really interesting one today.
Okay.
They pointed today or yesterday. I responded today. They pointed out a typo on our website, which caught my attention. Definitely it wasn't a mass email. And that wasn't the whole point of the email, but they started with that, and that caught my attention as a copywriter. They also mentioned some stuff from the Middle East, which for me, having lived in Turkey and Egypt, different places, to say something very specific,
right,
jumped out at me with the way they said it. But they didn't just say like, oh, I see you spent time in the Middle East. It was more something specific that was relatable to me and how I think. And so it's going from that generic statement to talking like an insider. And so an example of this is when I learn other languages, which I speak quite a few of, I try to learn really unusual slang first. Because
interesting.
If you do that, yeah, so if you do that, people really quickly will assume you speak a lot more and that you know it and you're an insider. Whereas if you just know how to say hi and thank you, which is fine, it's something, they're going to assume maybe it's more basic. And so if you're speaking Korean and you're blonde and white, if you can say really strange phrases like, I love to dance in Gangnam or whatever, people are like, oh my God, like,
what the heck?
Yeah, she speaks Korean. And like, I speak decent Korean, but not amazing. And so similarly, in your outbound, you can think about what is something that would make you sound like an insider. So rather than just mentioning the party, maybe I'm going to mention some kind of food or drink that was at the party, or something about the decorations that was really interesting or weird. And in doing that, I'm not just like this mass email. I'm a human, and I'm more likely to be someone that's relatable to them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's little things that you can do like that are actually a lot better than the personalization. It's just bringing in your own personality to the outbound.
Awesome. Yeah. And I want to kind of touch on the creepiness of the personalization, because you touched on like, it can be too creepy. So like, when does it go overboard? When you put too much information, like, hey, I saw you in, this country and I saw you with this, like, because you can get personal, but I feel like sometimes it can be too creepy.
Oh, totally. It can be very stalkerish. And it's kind of interesting. It's one of those things where it depends. And so like, even with my own outbound, I like to play both sides sometimes. I'll admit I can send the creepiest, weirdest cold emails myself, but they usually work. And the fact is that I'm a woman and I'm young. I can kind of get away with that more than like an older guy. If an older guy sends that to a woman or even another man, people will be kind of creeped out. So I use the fact that people won't feel threatened by a young girl or woman, usually, that I can be a little bit more out there and make me stand out more. But you have to also think about who you are and who your audience is and what their tolerance is. And so if you're emailing like tech nerds, you can maybe have some weird jokes or weird funky personality, or like, something about Soylent, whatever, that you think that they're probably either going to like, or if you make fun of lightly, they'll find funny. But to say, like, I watch you get coffee every morning on Instagram, I know where you. That's creepy.
It's like, oh my gosh, like, are you coming to my house next? Like, it's like blacklist.
But to your point, I think something that is really interesting is kind of like what I said. Rather than directly saying it, you call it out in another way. And so rather than saying like, I know your favorite coffee, if you know they're an SF and they always drink Phil's coffee, you can say, can I buy you a cup of coffee at Phil's next week? And it's targeted at them, and that they're much more likely to say yes. And maybe even you can say, my favorite is the blue, or no, that's Blue Bottle, but the whatever one, and you know that's theirs. And so if you put subtle little things in, if you don't do it too much, you're a little bit safer. But I would say that weird emails can work very well.
Okay.
You just have to be careful and ready to own up
Not be a
if they go
stalker.
wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for SDRs that are watching, kind of share maybe some email subject line tactics for, better open rates and better response rates.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different things you can do. I like to think about who your audience is and what they naturally already think about, talk about, and have in their inbox. And not just like crap, but like what are things that they have to respond to and emails they get regularly. So for example, if I'm a CFO, I probably am thinking a lot about my company's financials and different financial reports and metrics. If I'm a VP sales, I'm thinking a lot about my salespeople.
Right.
And, how are they doing? I'm also probably thinking about potential customers. If I got an email that looked like it was from a potential customer or an actual customer, if I'm a VP sales, or even marketing, I'm pretty likely to open it really quickly. Likewise, if the CFO thinks there's something from the IRS or an auditor or a vendor, they're more likely to probably open it. Even if they're not going to act on it, they are going to open it to forward it to the right person. And so the subject line is all about just getting them to open it, but you have to think about the end outcome. So if you have something that's very clickbaity and you get a really high open, that can be very bad if it is not at all related to your body because people feel misled.
Right.
So you want to think about that intersection. And so you have that subject line that is doing all those things I mentioned, but tangentially related to your body so that they don't feel that you've tricked them or misled them and they can understand why. And so if you had a subject line that was like question about company's financial report for Q3 16, whatever, CFO opens it, there better be something about financial reporting in there. Maybe you have financial reporting software and you're talking about how they can do it better, but you better have something connected to that. Otherwise, they're going to be like, WTF, spam, delete, da.
May get tagged on Twitter.
Yeah. Totally.
Exactly. You don't want that. You don't want that.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, and I feel like, you kind of nailed on the head that, open rates can be sometimes a bad metric to look at for SDRs because like, I have a, 50% open rate, but I'm only getting like, 4% response, which is like, that's not good because that's a lot of people opening it but not responding. So the subject line has to correlate with the body or there'll be problems there. So going into this, what do you think SDRs are doing wrong in their cold outreach? Is it being too lazy? Is it not even personalizing? Is it doing no research? What do you see has been, I guess, the disconnect?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different problems. I think, having really self-focused, presumptuous, aggressive emails that just assume that people want to know about their company and take a demo and talk to them is always a problem. But I would also say another issue with SDRs is assuming that always having personalization, on the other hand, is a must in that every detail of personalization will necessarily improve their results. A lot of different like social selling personalization details don't always add any increase in response rate at all. They just slow you down. It's not always true. They can add a lot of value, but the point is you should start with minimal personalization unless you have a really small, highly valuable market like we talked about. And then from there, what you can do is you can see if you add this or that, whatever personalization, custom insert, you can see how much lift you get or don't get. And sometimes the impact is negative. I've seen examples where our client had a custom insert where it was a whole sentence that was really actionable advice. They got lower response rates because all the information was in there and there was less incentive to talk to them.
Yeah.
So it took them like 10 times longer to do, and it actually hurt them because they were giving everything away and people either felt they didn't need them or they felt there was nothing more after that. So I think that's a lot. The one other thing I would say is it's really important to think about your metrics throughout the funnel, kind of like we talked about. So open rates, very misleading, false positives, false negatives. Why are they opening? Maybe you're pissing them off and actually making them feel misled, or other things. You can get spam complaint problems. Likewise, another false positive, though, honestly, can be response rates themselves. So if you're using one of the many outbound sales, outbound email tools, you might be looking at response rates and counting negative as well, or out of office, or
no
all
thanks,
kinds of
but
things.
no thanks.
Yeah.
Right.
And the final problem I would say that I think is huge is the whole who's the right person approach. I hate this, and here's the reason why. It gives you a lot of false positives, and it is really a huge time waster and a source of a lot of unqualified leads and useless conversations. So if you have a really vague email and you're just asking for who's the right person, just because that person responds or forwards you on doesn't mean that it's the right time, or that you're talking to the decision maker, or all kinds of things. So I would say more and more to be less vague and less generic in your emails, and think about specific use cases, pain points, value props, all of that. And even if it decreases your response rate, you should be looking beyond that to appointments and closed deals, because that a lot of times, your response rate might go down a little, but the others will go up, which is a lot more valuable.
Yeah, and you should know kind of who, in this day and age, we have so much information, you should know who kind of is the person that will handle that.
Exactly. The only exception I can think of for that is we work with some clients that we're going after people with very ambiguous roles or titles within a department. And, if you're sort of selling to a newer space where the title isn't consistent, and it's not consistently, that function or role isn't consistently owned by the same kind of person over and over, then it's appropriate. But you're not saying, I'm looking for the person who manages finance. You're saying, I'm looking for the person who manages training for, yeah, exactly. Totally. And you need that value either way to get anyone to respond or forward you on anyways.
Awesome. Well, Heather, I've enjoyed this interview so far. One last question, then we can kind of talk about what's going on your end as sales folk. What's the one piece of advice you'd give to SDRs as they go throughout their journey and they do their cold outreach?
I would say my really big piece of advice is to really think about your emails and keep testing, trying new things, and iterating, because you can't rely on a single tactic or template ever, because even if something works now, other people are going to start doing it and it will become ineffective eventually. In econ, we call that tragedy of the commons. And so, it's like pollution. Eventually, everyone does the same thing, and so it doesn't stand out, doesn't work. And so you have to be trying different things and iterating and looking at the data, or else you're just going to fall behind eventually and become a dinosaur.
Right. You don't want to be a dinosaur, and you don't want pollution. Those are two things you don't want.
Totally.
All of that. Heather, what's going on, sales folk? Tell us what's going on your end and exciting things that are happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're still working with lots of B2B sales organizations, helping them create really targeted and scalable outbound email campaigns that we basically write for them after doing research and helping them look at the results and optimize them to get 3 or 10x better results, which is awesome. But we also recently launched a course, which is called the Cold Email Mastery course.
Awesome.
And we have more than 21 lessons in there right now. And we're adding some more. So we have that, which is pretty cool, and some other stuff coming out around that. So check it out. The first lesson is free. And we're also hiring an SDR and an AE. So if you're interested in that, check out the job posting on the website and shoot me a message.
Well, there you guys go. If you're looking for an opportunity, go to Heather. Heather, once again, thank you so much for coming on the Chronicles. I know that everyone will love this episode. And as I always say, guys, keep dialing, and I'll see you guys soon.
Thanks for having me, Morgan. Cheers.